I walked into the mediation office on a Thursday afternoon in March, carrying a leather binder and the kind of calm that only comes after you've spent 4 years learning how not to react. The building was one of those converted Victorian houses in downtown Ashford, Georgia. The kind with crown molding and creaky stairs that someone had tried to modernize with recessed lighting and a reception desk made of reclaimed wood. It didn't work. The place still smelled like old wallpaper glue and someone's leftover lunch. I signed in at the front desk, took a seat in the waiting area, and placed my binder flat on my lap. Through the glass partition, I could see the conference room where this would happen. A long oak table, 8 chairs. A pitcher of water that no one would touch. My mother arrived first. She walked in wearing her navy cardigan, the one she always wore to things she considered serious. Church, parent-teacher conferences. The day she told me I would never be anything more than a burden. She didn't see me right away. When she did, she looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you forgot you owned. My father came in behind her, followed by their attorney, a tall woman named Sandra Keller who had a reputation in Ashford County for being thorough and slightly theatrical. She carried a leather briefcase and walked like someone who expected the room to rearrange itself around her. I had not spoken to my parents in 4 years and 3 months. The last conversation, if you could call it that, happened in the kitchen of their house on Belmont Drive. I had just told them I was leaving my retail job to take an entry-level position at a logistics company 2 states away. My father put down his fork and told me I was chasing fantasies. My mother said I had always been the difficult one. The one who couldn't just be grateful. My older sister Renee sat across from me and said nothing, which in our family was its own kind of agreement. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I finished my plate, washed it, set it in the drying rack, and went upstairs to pack. I left before sunrise. I didn't leave a note because I had already said everything I had to say. The silence that followed wasn't punishment, it was preservation. I drove to Savannah first, then eventually settled in Charlotte. I had $600 and a job offer that paid $32,000 a year. The apartment I found was a studio above a dry cleaner. The smell of chemical solvent crept through the vents every morning at 7. I bought a mattress from a guy on Craigslist and a desk from Goodwill and I started over. My grandmother Vivian was the only person from Ashford who kept in touch. She was my mother's mother, 81 years old, small and sharp, and completely unwilling to pretend. She had this way of saying exactly what she meant without raising her voice. She once told me that the people who talk the most about family loyalty are usually the ones who've earned it the least. I never forgot that. Vivian called me every Sunday evening. She never asked when I was coming home. She asked if I had eaten, if I was sleeping enough, if the weather in Charlotte was treating me right. Small questions. But they were the kind of questions that meant someone was paying attention. I sent her money every month. Not a lot at first. Maybe 100, sometimes 2. When I got promoted, I sent more. She never asked for it. I just knew. Her roof had been leaking for 2 years and nobody in the family had done anything about it, so I called a contractor in Ashford, paid for the repair over the phone, and asked them not to mention my name. Vivian figured it out anyway. She called me that night and said, "You didn't have to do that." I told her I knew. She said, "That's why it matters." She passed on a Tuesday in January. Doctor said. Robertson, her physician, called me at work. I was in the middle of reviewing a supply chain audit for our Southeast region. I sat in my office chair for a long time after hanging up, staring at the whiteboard on my wall covered in shipping routes and vendor codes, and I thought about how strange it is that the world just keeps going when someone who held a piece of it together is no longer in it. I left work early. I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried in the way you cry when you've been expecting something for years and it still catches you completely off guard. Vivian's will was straightforward. She left me the house on Corbin Lane. A 2-bedroom cottage with a wraparound porch, a magnolia tree in the front yard, and a kitchen where she had taught me to make cornbread when I was 9. The house was old and imperfect, and it was the only place in Ashford where I had ever felt like I belonged. My family found out within the week. My mother called from her number. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that lasted nearly 6 minutes. The core of it was this: the house should go to her, not me. She was Vivian's daughter. I was just the granddaughter. And besides, I had abandoned the family. I had no moral right to anything. My father called the next day. His message was shorter but sharper. He said Vivian had clearly not been in her right mind. He said he intended to challenge the will. My sister Renee texted me a single line: "This is wrong and you know it." I didn't respond to any of them. 3 weeks later, a formal dispute was filed through Sandra Keller's office. The claim was that Vivian had been unduly influenced, that her mental state in the final months had been compromised, and that the property should be redistributed to her surviving daughter, my mother, as the rightful heir. I drove to Ashford on a Saturday. I let myself into Vivian's house with the keys she had given me 6 years earlier, pressed into my palm one Thanksgiving while everyone else was watching football. She had looked at me and said, "Just in case." I didn't know what she meant then. I think I do now. The house was quiet in the way only empty houses can be. Her reading glasses were on the kitchen counter next to a crossword puzzle she'd been halfway through. I sat on the porch and looked out at the magnolia tree, and I let the silence do what it needed to do. The mediator assigned to the case was a man named Thomas Beckett, early 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, the demeanor of someone who had spent decades listening to people argue about things that mattered and things that didn't, and had learned to tell the difference quickly. He had a legal pad in front of him and a pen he never seemed to use. I would later learn he had mediated over 300 family disputes in the state of Georgia. He didn't look impressed by anyone in the room, which I found oddly reassuring. Sandra Keller went first. She was organized, I'll give her that. She laid out the case methodically. My mother had been Vivian's primary caregiver in the final years. She had driven her to medical appointments. She had managed her prescriptions. She had handled the grocery shopping when Vivian could no longer drive. By contrast, I had been absent. I had left the state. I had not attended Thanksgivings or Christmases. I had not visited during Vivian's decline. The picture she painted was clear. I was the granddaughter who disappeared and returned only when there was something to collect. Keller then introduced a statement from my sister Renee, read aloud in Keller's measured courtroom voice. Renee described me as someone who had always been distant, always been difficult, always made things about myself. She said our grandmother had been generous to a fault and that I had taken advantage of that generosity. I sat with my hands folded on the table and I listened. I didn't react. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I had spent 4 years learning that silence, properly timed, speaks louder than most arguments. Then my mother asked to speak. She stood slowly, pressing her fingertips against the edge of the table for balance. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she kept adjusting the collar of her cardigan. But her voice was steady when she began. She talked about the years of worry. The years of not knowing where I was or whether I was safe. She talked about the holidays with an empty place setting, the birthday cards that came back as undeliverable because I had moved without telling anyone. She talked about lying awake at night wondering what she had done to make her youngest daughter hate her so much. And then she turned to look at me directly, and her voice shifted into something harder, something that had been waiting a long time for this particular room. She said I had always been ungrateful. That they had given me everything, a roof, meals, an education through high school, and I had thrown it all back in their faces. She said I was not the kind of person who built things. I was the kind of person who took things and left. She said the word that landed heaviest. She called me useless. She said it the way people say things they've been thinking for years, without hesitation, without shame. The room went still. Thomas Beckett looked at her for a long moment, then made a small note on his legal pad. He turned to me. "Miss Hollis," he said, "would you like to respond?" I didn't respond right away. I reached for my binder, opened it, and slid the contents across the table to the clerk sitting beside Beckett. Then I sat back and folded my hands again. Inside that binder were 47 letters. Handwritten, most of them. Letters I had written to Vivian over 4 years. She had kept every single one. I found them in a shoebox in her closet when I visited the house, bundled with rubber bands and arranged by date. Some of them had her notes in the margins. Small responses she never mailed. Things like proud of you and you sound tired, eat something, and once simply good girl. There were also bank records, monthly transfers from my account to Vivian's, starting at $100, increasing over time. By the last year, I was sending $400 a month. There were contractor invoices for the roof repair, the plumbing fix in the second bathroom, the new water heater I had paid for after she mentioned in passing that hers had broken. None of these had my name on them publicly. Vivian had told no one. And at the back of the binder, there was a letter. Not from Vivian, from my employer. I had joined Whitfield Logistics as a receiving clerk. I sorted packages, I answered phones. I worked the loading dock on weekends when they were short-staffed. Within 18 months, I moved into inventory coordination. Within 3 years, I was promoted to Regional Operations Analyst for the company's Southeast Division. I oversaw distribution compliance for 4 states. My annual performance reviews were in the binder too, every single one rated exceptional. The letter from my employer, signed by the VP of Operations, stated that I had been selected to lead the company's new process optimization initiative across 11 facilities. It listed my salary, which I won't share here, but I will say it was more than both of my parents earned combined. Thomas Beckett read through the document slowly. He wasn't performing, he was reading. Sandra Keller watched from across the table. I could see her recalculating. Beckett set the last page down. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with the hem of his jacket, and put them back on. He looked at Sandra Keller. "Counselor," he said, "you've described your client as the primary caretaker of the deceased. Can you tell me who paid for the roof replacement on the Corbin Lane property in 2024? Keller paused. "I'd have to verify that." "I can save you the trouble," Beckett said. It was the respondent, who also covered the plumbing repair, the water heater replacement, and the property taxes for 2023 and 2024. All documented. All with corresponding receipts. He turned to my mother. "Ma'am, you described your daughter as someone who takes and leaves. The financial record in front of me suggests she's been contributing to this estate more consistently than anyone else in this room." My mother opened her mouth and then closed it. Beckett continued. "You also described her as, and I'm quoting from my notes, useless." He let that word sit in the air for a moment. "Miss Hollis currently holds a senior operational role overseeing compliance across 4 states. She has been independently supporting this property for over 2 years. I want to be very precise here. The characterization you've offered does not align with the evidence." My mother looked at me. Not with anger this time. With something closer to confusion. The kind of confusion that comes when the version of someone you've been carrying in your head for years doesn't match the person sitting in front of you. My father sat rigid in his chair, staring at the table. Keller tried to recover. She argued that financial contributions didn't establish emotional proximity, that inheritance should reflect relationship, not transaction. Beckett nodded. He agreed with her in principle. Then he said, very calmly, that the 47 handwritten letters in the binder suggested that emotional proximity was not in fact absent, that Vivian had kept everyone, that she had written in the margins, that the relationship between my grandmother and me had been active, documented, and deeply personal. He paused, and I could tell he was choosing his next words carefully. "Families are complicated," he said. "I've been doing this work for a long time. I've seen people fight over houses, bank accounts, jewelry, things that matter and things that don't. But what I've learned is that a will is not just a legal document. It's the last thing a person says when they can no longer speak." Vivian Hollis made her intentions clear. She made them clear repeatedly, and she made them clear to the one person she trusted to understand. He looked at me. "The will stands." I didn't feel relief. Not exactly. I felt something closer to the sensation of surfacing after being underwater for a long time. Not gasping, just breathing. The room emptied slowly. Keller left first, shaking Beckett's hand and avoiding mine. Renee, who had been sitting in the back row, left without a word. I didn't blame her. She had her own version of the story, and I suspect it would take time for her to revise it. My parents stayed. My father spoke first. He didn't look at me directly. He looked at the table, at the space where the binder had been. "When did you start working in logistics?" he asked. 4 years ago, I said, right after I left. He nodded slowly. And the money you sent Mama Viv? How long? Since the beginning. Every month. He exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind that carries weight out of the body. My mother was quieter. She sat with her hands in her lap, turning her wedding ring the way she always did when she was thinking about something she didn't want to say. Finally she said, I didn't know any of that. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. I thought about every conversation we'd ever had, the ones that started with me trying to share something and ended with her telling me why it wouldn't work, why it was being unrealistic, why Renee had already done it better. I thought about the last dinner, my father's fork on the plate, my mother's voice saying difficult, my sister's silence. Because every time I tried to tell you something, I said, you already had your mind made up about what it meant. She didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between us like something physical, like a rope pulled taut. Then she said, I shouldn't have called you useless. She said it simply, no tears, no performance, just a plain, clear sentence, the kind that costs something to say. My father nodded. We got it wrong, he said. I don't know how to fix that. I told him I wasn't asking him to fix it. I told him I was going to renovate the house. New kitchen, fresh paint, fix the porch railing that had been loose since I was a kid. I told them if they wanted to see what Vivian had left behind, not just the house but the letters, the photos, the crossword puzzles she never finished, they were welcome to come by. My mother said she would like that. 2 weeks later, my father showed up at the house on Corbin Lane with a toolbox and a bag of sandwiches from the deli on Main Street. He didn't apologize again. He didn't make a speech. He just walked in, looked at the porch railing and said, I can fix this. We worked for 3 hours without talking much. He handed me nails. I held the boards. At one point, he looked at the magnolia tree and said, Your grandmother planted that the year your mother was born. I didn't know that. He told me a few more things I didn't know. Small things. The kind of things people share when they are trying to rebuild a bridge one plank at a time. When he left, he stood by his truck for a moment. He looked at me and said, You built something out there. I should have asked about it. I told him he was asking now. That was enough for today. Renee called me a week after that. The conversation was short and careful, like two people walking on a frozen lake, testing each step. She said she was sorry for the statement she had given Keller. She said she had written it quickly and hadn't thought about what it would feel like to hear it read aloud. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't. But I told her the door was open if she wanted to walk through it. My mother came to the house on a Sunday. She brought a casserole, which is what Southern women bring when they don't have words yet. She walked through each room slowly, touching things. She stopped at the kitchen counter where Vivian's reading glasses still sat beside the crossword puzzle. She picked them up and held them for a long time. She never told me about the letters, my mother said. She never told me you drove her to her appointments, I said. We looked at each other. For maybe the first time in years, we were seeing each other without the filter of who we expected the other person to be. I think she kept us both closer than we realized, my mother said. I poured 2 cups of coffee and we sat on the porch. The magnolia tree was just starting to bud. The air smelled like red clay and fresh lumber from the porch repair. We didn't solve anything that afternoon. We didn't have a movie moment where everything was forgiven and forgotten. We just sat together, 2 people at the beginning of something that might take a very long time to build. There is a particular kind of weight you carry when someone in your family has defined you, and you've spent years trying to outgrow that definition without anyone noticing. It doesn't feel like anger exactly. It feels like holding your breath. And the moment someone finally sees you clearly, you don't feel vindicated. You just feel tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down and notice how much your arms ache. Vivian used to say that love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's the person who calls every Sunday. It's the check that arrives without a note. It's the key pressed into your palm at Thanksgiving with 2 words, just in case. I don't know yet whether my family and I will find our way back to each other completely. I know my father shows up with his toolbox now. I know my sister calls. I know my mother sits on the porch and drinks coffee, and sometimes says things she means. I know the door is no longer locked from either side. If there's someone in your life you think you know completely, a daughter, a son, a sister, someone you haven't spoken to in years, someone you've already made up your mind about, I want you to sit with one question tonight. When was the last time you asked them who they've become instead of assuming you already knew?